Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, the legislature is back in session. We've got the governor's budget message coming up on February 4. We're going to take a look with a couple of Pennsylvania's top journalists, the year ahead in Pennsylvania government and politics, and then we're going to have a little health care update with Dr. Stuart Shapiro. All of that and more follows these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, Amy Worden with the Philadelphia Inquirer and Brad Bumsted, Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, two great journalists that were on the show frequently. I want to thank them as we get into the new year for coming on the program. Last week we mentioned the untimely passing of Pete DeCourcy. I know he was a friend of both of you. Great journalist, great colleague. Brad?
It was really sad. He was a friend of many of us, and he was a first-rate journalist. And he made major contributions to, journalism in Harrisburg, statewide coverage of politics and government.
Yep, he could always find something intriguing to write about, right, Amy?
Right. Well, in addition to his excellent reporting, I don't think we should forget his contribution to helping young journalists too. He was a mentor for many journalists as part of our legislative correspondence
association. And they blogged and tweeted and wrote about that, some of them. All right, Amy, I'm going to start with you. We are all looking with anticipation towards what may be one of the single most important, well, I'll exaggerate it a bit, but let's be candid. February 4 is a huge day in Pennsylvania politics or government, and it has political ramifications. What's going to happen?
Right. Well, the governor will be giving his annual budget address. It's clear from the projections given by his budget secretary last month that Pennsylvania is not out of the recession yet. It looks like
so true.
It looks like the state will have a roughly $1.4 billion deficit, which has to be made up somehow. Now, there's extreme reluctance within the legislature, and I think to some degree the administration too, to cut any further. Particularly in education. Everybody's focused on education. Everybody wants to actually add to the education budget this year, and social services as well have taken a big hit. So the cuts are not there.
Right.
Now, so turning to new revenues, big open question, although the budget secretary suggested that the administration might be open to some new fees or taxes.
That leads to an interesting question, which they've not been in favor of a severance tax on the natural gas industry. That's a tax on the cubic feet that actually comes out of these deep wells that are fracked. Brad, some argue the pledge has already, in a sense, been violated. Transportation, big bill, supported by the voters.
The governor's no tax pledge, you mean?
Yeah, right.
Right. Some would argue that, and we do have an impact fee. Exactly what its status is legally is unclear since the Supreme Court overturned Act 13 in regard to the state not controlling local zoning. But it's up in the air. Therefore, people want to open it up and raise the amount of the impact fee to bring in more revenue. Democrats largely have seen that as the choice for all sorts of social ills and fixing the budget and in a number of areas. The question is, will Corbett and the Republicans agree to raise that?
Well, we also got something else that they keep debating. Number one, online gaming, right? Whether we go online gaming, and even though it looks like we're not going to have lottery privatization, the management, we got to get that correct. Keno, so we could have other forms of gaming. Is that
right?
They debate that.
Yeah, Pennsylvania's right in the middle of the gambling arms race. Yeah. I mean, let's let's not forget with states all around us, upping the ante. Now, New Jersey has online gambling. There is clearly new pressure on Pennsylvania to do so, and the governor has said he's open to the addition of Keno in the lottery.
So it looks like, we'll see. We could have an expansion of gaming. All right, Brad, I'm going to turn to you.
Though, where does that money get spent? Because Senator Pileggi and some other Senate Republicans want to freeze senior citizen property taxes with it. Well, if you do that, how much is left for budget relief, and then how much is left for lottery programs, which was the point to begin with.
All right, we've got Governor Corbett. I don't think there's any doubt his office is going to make a push to do either liquor privatization and or pensions, $49 billion pension debt to two big pension systems, school teachers, pension system, and state employees. Is that right?
That is right. I think they'll make a push for both, and it'll just depend which one bubbles to the surface the best. But there have been ongoing talks over liquor. Everybody assumes it's dead because it didn't pass in June, but they've been working to try to come up with something. No way do we see a complete sale of the state stores in 1 year, as Governor Corbett and Mike Terzai, state rep from Allegheny County, wanted to do, but more private sales, which is sort of what the Senate talked about.
Right. So
in some capacity,
a
hybrid plan with maybe scaling back the state stores over a period of time and more private sales, including beer. We could see that this year.
Okay. We're going to run to a break. When we come back, there are two issues that are in the courts. One is same-sex marriage. We've got cases in both the federal and state courts. We've also got the voter ID law. I can't figure out how long that's been going on, whether it's going to go into an effect. We could get some decision about voter ID. We'll talk about those two important cases after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation, educating citizens and business leaders about important public policy issues and civic affairs. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back. Well, Amy Worden and Brad Bumsted, both are journalists. We're looking ahead at some of what we could expect out of the governor's office, the state legislature, and of course, Amy Worden, the courts. It seems like almost every big issue in Pennsylvania turns into the courts. No issue, I think, more controversial than the same-sex marriage cases. We've got multiple cases going on. The Attorney General of the state would not go after the Montgomery County Register of Wills, who started issue marriage license. He said no. She didn't think she would do that. She turned it over to Governor's Council. So I mean, who knows, right?
Right. Well, we have the state case involving the Montgomery County Register of Wills, and then we have the federal case brought last summer by the ACLU and plaintiffs challenging the State Defense of Marriage Act.
Right.
So, and that's in federal court right now. That trial is set to begin in June. Anything could happen there. The suggestion, of course, with the federal case, Utah courts just struck down.
So they both end up going to the Supreme Court? I mean, that's what I've read, that ultimately...
Possibly could, yeah. But I think interesting underlying this is that pressure now on Corbett after he came out and said he was in support of a non-discrimination legislation, just kind of out of the blue, which was an interesting move on him.
Now that's likely to be the big push. Would you agree?
Yeah.
When you talk to folks in the LGBT community, they talk more about doing that
than
the gay marriage, which would you agree the legislature doesn't look like it's going
probably not open to it yet, although the polls overwhelmingly suggest people are supporting
that's right.
it.
But that's an excellent point.
I think that's another issue to be aware of that will be coming up in 2014.
All right, so that's yep, we could get what basically we're talking about is Pennsylvania's law now does not prohibit an employer from discriminating on the basis of sexual identity and
orientation.
And orientation. I think I got that right. Well, Brad, it's a story that won't end. It's called voter ID. This law goes back 2012.
Yes.
So I got that right? And it's in court. I mean, can't we get a court decision here about, first of all, whether it's legal or not, constitutional or not?
It's been a real hot potato in the courts that they keep tossing it back from one court to another. But ultimately, I think the Supreme Court rules on it this year.
Our Supreme Court.
Yeah, our state Supreme Court. And I think that'll be the end of it. That'll be the final decision because the U.S. Supreme Court has already ruled on these issues. That's why the supporters of this had felt confident that they could get this through in terms of requiring people to show photo ID when they go in to vote. The issue is whether that's discriminatory to minorities and low-income people.
Older people, too.
Yeah, older folks as well, and make it more difficult for them to be able to vote. That's really the issue here. But there is some legal basis for being able to say, look, we should be able to do this. A number of other states are doing it. But where this got off on the wrong foot was the Republicans controlling the legislature tried to do it and enact it right before the presidential election.
And it looked political.
Yeah, it did look political, and that's where everybody was pulling back saying, whoa, wait a minute.
The other aspect of this is that we had a law for new first-time voters anyway that didn't seem controversial. And basically what I read about some of the concerns, it's not that you would show some form of ID, but there were, I think, 6 or 7 particular ones you had to show. So you shouldn't take a rent. See, the legislature is probably not going to do any. You haven't heard about anything in the until this gets resolved in the courts, right?
And somehow amending the law? No.
No, you don't think so?
I haven't heard anything.
Not going to happen. All right. Well, let's turn to the last one. Both of you are going to have a full-time job here. I'm assigning it to you. No, I'm kidding. Following the Democratic race for governor, right? 8 candidates. Any insights before I let you go? I'll start with you.
Only
Brad.
one insight is there won't be 8 by the time voters go to the polls. These kind of things, people tend to get weeded out when they don't have the money. They realize they can't compete. They realize the resources it would take just to be out there and get away from their job and campaign. So we may be down to a half dozen or so by the time, but still a lot.
Now, most of them running are in her newspaper's coverage area, right? At the moment, you don't have any, but you could have one. You could have the Auditor General Jack Wagner. But I think the fact is, and I think you would agree, that we have the governor's message in just about everything that gets done this year in the legislature and by the governor will be looked at as through the political prism.
Sure, because don't forget the state races. And we have the full House and half the Senate up. So every move that everybody makes from this point on will be judged through the lens of the campaign. All
right. Well, great update. Of course, you'll come back through the year and we'll be chatting about all these issues as they come up. All right. We're going to get our healthcare update. We try to do this once a month. We got a couple of states' Medicaid expansion. That's very important. What's going to happen with that? We got Dr. Stuart Shapiro in the House. Back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, well, here we are at the beginning of a new year. We're going to do the first of our monthly healthcare updates. Joining me, as often is the case, is Dr. Stuart Shapiro. He's the president and CEO of Pennsylvania Healthcare Association. Dr. Shapiro, welcome to the program.
Happy New Year, Terry.
Same to you. Well, we're going to have a big year in healthcare, and I don't think there's any issue that has moved more front and center. Of course, we have the Affordable Care Act, but we also have the expansion of Medicaid. And there are 2 ways that Pennsylvania conceivably could do it. One, and I'm going to let you talk about this, is the governor's plan, and the other is to do the more traditional Medicaid expansion. Do I got that right? Basically, they're the 2 plans. So why don't you talk first about the governor's plan, because I know that's the one that you've been focusing a good bit of your attention on.
As you know, I am nonpartisan or bipartisan. I talk only facts. I work with Democrats and I work with Republicans. And I've been working on national health insurance since 1973 when I was a chief aide to Senator Ted Kennedy. Mm-hmm. This is near and dear to my heart.
Okay.
As you say, there's two ways to do it. Traditional Medicaid expansion, which was proposed by the Obama administration, or the plan that Governor Corbett's taken. If you look at the differences, the governor's plan makes much, much more sense fiscally, socially, economically, quality of care wise, lets people maintain their physicians if they have them, which the Affordable Care Act undercuts. But most importantly, it doesn't expand Medicaid, which is a very, very broken system. Mm-hmm. Today in Pennsylvania, 1 of 4 Pennsylvanians is on Medicaid.
Sure. Are on Medicaid, 1 in 4.
1 in 4.
Okay.
Excuse me, 1 in 6. I apologize.
That's fine.
But if they would have expanded Medicaid the way the Affordable Care Act proposes, 1 in 4 would have been on it.
Okay.
Significant expansion. By using private insurance markets, the Corbett plan brings affordability, sustainability, quality, flexibility, and it all uses private markets. It maximizes government money. Under the Affordable Care Act and the way the Obama administration wanted Medicaid expansion, there was going to be support, significant support for the first couple of years. After that, it started to dwindle down. And what Governor Corbett has said is, I can't, as governor, pour billions of dollars into a broken system that's unsustainable. Yeah. And by the way, as you know, I'm bipartisan. Yeah. But Tom Corbett's right.
Just so to help our viewers out, here's what, tell me, Governor Corbett is saying he wants to take the subsidy that comes to the state and turn the subsidy, and it's based on a formula, poverty level and all of that, to individuals. They would then buy their own coverage on the insurance exchange. Is that correct? Is that what he's proposing?
And it would be and they'd be using federal dollars to pay for it.
Right.
He wouldn't be putting it into a terribly broken Medicaid system, which underpays people. And if he underpays the providers, whether they be doctors or hospitals or nursing homes, he also will allow, the governor had a very successful program called CHIP, which has been around now for 20 years.
Started by Governor Casey.
Started by Governor Casey, expanded by Governor Ridge,
right.
Further expanded and reauthorized by Governor Corbett, and he wants to maintain that program. Obamacare in its standard form would have put all those individuals onto Medicaid. The other thing that the Corbett plan doesn't do is it doesn't pit limited Medicaid dollars, which are used for the elderly and for disabled to provide services at home and in nursing homes. It doesn't pit them against the new people coming onto Medicaid.
Okay.
So his plan makes sense today, and it will make even more sense tomorrow.
Okay, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to ask you about one of the more controversial features, and that's a work requirement that, and as I'll let you get into this, his plan has to be approved by HHS, Health and Human Services. One of the more controversial aspects is the work requirement. I want to let Dr. Shapiro weigh on that. And if we have any time, there's another piece of legislation that we want to talk about. We'll do that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back with Dr. Stuart Shapiro. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association. For our monthly healthcare update, we try to do every month, get involved in some of the more important healthcare issues. All right, as I said before the break, one of the more controversial features is the work requirement and whether HHS, and I want to point out, and why don't you can mention this in your response if you want, that this has to be approved by Health and Human Services, and there have been back and forth on that. Go ahead.
As you know, I'm bipartisan,
right,
or nonpartisan. So I'm not here to defend Governor Corbett's plan, but I do think it is the right plan. And it's too important because it's the plan on the table that our congressional delegation, all 18 members, support. And so far, it's been not a single Democrat has supported it. But it's right there, and the plan would bring 500,000 people onto the insurance system almost immediately, as soon as it gets approved by HHS. Now, that work requirement. HHS has not said no.
Right.
We know lots of people, at least I know lots of people, who have been collecting unemployment compensation because they've been laid off. They have a work requirement. Seems to me that a work requirement to collect a federal subsidy or to get insurance paid for by the taxpayers is not unreasonable. It shouldn't become a political football. And that's why both Democrats and Republicans ought to sign up and support this. HHS ultimately could say no. It's only one feature of the plan.
Right.
But it does bring some responsibility to the issue, just like the plan promotes people to stop smoking, that they lead healthier lives. That's very important in
But they
today's
could also
market.
just say, we'll approve it if you drop that requirement.
They absolutely could
regardless
say,
of whether it's right, the requirement's good or bad.
They absolutely could. I happen to see an article
similar to the
other
Arkansas plan that they approved for Arkansas. Go ahead.
It's almost identical to the Arkansas plan. But they could say no to this. But again, my view is that the congressional delegation, Democrats and Republicans, ought to try to fix this, not nix this, because it's too important to begin to bring health care to Pennsylvanians now and not wait a year or two further, which would be what would happen if this were turned down.
Yeah. We only have about a minute and a half left, but there's a bill in the legislature that deals with admission status during hospital treatment that you have an interest in, and it has to do with what hospitals would require. Give us a thumbnail
Again,
on that
it's
one.
my role as an advocate for the elderly.
Right
now, if an elderly person goes into a hospital emergency room, and then they go upstairs to a room and they're there, they don't know whether they're really admitted to the hospital or what technically in what's called observation status. It's very important. All this bill does is require that the hospital tell them what their status is. Because if they're in admissions, then when they go for rehabilitation after they get discharged from the hospital, then it's covered. But if they're on observation stay and they stay, they have to stay 3 days. But if they're in observation status, this doesn't get paid for, and they could be held accountable for tens of thousands of dollars of bills. This is a bill supported by AARP. It's a consumer piece of legislation. Again, it's our role as advocates for the elderly.
Well, we're going to obviously follow particularly the debate over the Medicaid expansion, which is, as you know, a pretty big issue, and we'll have you back, obviously, as we move along here. All right, I want to thank you, first of all, for being on the program, and I want to thank you for watching, and as always, you stay well.